So we're live. I usually let it wait a minute or 30 seconds or so to let people kind of file in.
Do we see the people or not?
No, thank God. I've done a few of those, and you're like, ah.
Okay, great. Salute.
They see you.
Are you drinking a screwdriver, Mike?
That's very Santa Rita Hills if you are.
No, you know what? Honest to God, what it is a Snoop Dogg, gin and juice.
I grew up trying to drink gin and juice, and we were like, which juice was he talking about?
Well, it didn't matter, I don't think.
Yeah, none of them are very, very good to me. But yeah, it's a trial and error.
Well, I ran out of tonic, Matt, so.
All right, let's fire this thing up here. Hello, everyone who's joining us. Larry Schaefer's already commenting, saying he can see us. See Mike drinking his Snoop Dogg. I'm Matt Kettmann. I'm a journalist. I'm a senior editor with the Santa Barbara Independent, contributing editor with Wine Enthusiast magazine, where I review a couple hundred wines a month. A lot of those wines come from the Santa Rita Hills. When was it? Last June, we started doing this series, interviewing winemakers and tasting wines from the Santa Rita Hills during the pandemic, bringing their wines and their information and their stories to you at home. It's been a fun ride. We've had on like 30 plus winemakers already, and we have a few more coming up. So I'll do the schedule that we have coming at the end here. But today we have an action-packed show. We almost have too many good people here. It's going to be a lot to take in here in 40 minutes or so. Up on my left, we have Byron Winery, and Katy Rogers is representing Byron Winery. So Byron Winery started by Ken Brown actually back in 1984. Byron, I believe, is his middle name or his real first name, something like that. Katy actually started working there in 2009, so it was kind of her first entry into the wine world, and she's grown up to become a very important part of the Jackson family team, which owns Byron and bought it back in 06, I think we figured out. We also have Matt Revlett, who is with Siduri Wines. Matt's been the winemaker at Siduri Wines since 2019. Siduri started back in 1994 by Adam Lee, who is basically a legend in the Pinot Noir world, sourcing Pinot from all up and down the coast, even into Oregon. They're based up in Sonoma County, and that's where Matt lives and makes wine still. But they're pulling a ton of wine from Santa Rita Hills, Santa Lucia Highlands, Santa Maria Valley, all over the place. Matt has some pretty big shoes to fill, but seems to have the right spirit and sentiment and knowledge and temperament, perhaps, to take on Adam Lee's shoes. And also joining us, another legend from the wine growing side is Mike Anderson, who worked at the Oakville station for UC Davis for 60 years. Mike, how long were you there? Oh, wow. Anyway,
a while, but actually most of the time I spent on campus doing research and extension, research with Mark Matthews and extension stuff with Jim Walford. Yeah,
great. So a couple of years ago, John Wagner at Peak Ranch actually had taken some classes from Mike, I believe, and lured him down. And so now Mike farms Peak Ranch, and he farms Don Sebastiano Vineyard, has grown to be one of the more well-known and well-sourced properties in the Santa Rita Hills. So the first wine we're trying tonight is the Byron 2017 Don Sebastiano Vineyard. And then after that, we're going to try the 2017 Siduri from La Encantada Vineyard, another incredibly important property in the Santa Rita Hills. So we're going to try to get a lot of information in your heads and some wine in your glasses. And let's start with Katy, because Byron Winery has the longest history here. Tell us a little about the winery, tell us a little about yourself, and then we can kind of move into the wine and hear from Mike about what makes this vineyard so interesting.
Of course. So like you said, Ken Byron Brown started Byron Winery back in 1984, but the heritage of that site actually goes back to 1964, because on that site is the Nielsen Vineyard. That was the first commercial vineyard in Santa Barbara County. And why that's important is because when Muriel Nielsen planted it, everybody said, "You're too crazy. That's too far south to plant grapes or to grow quality grapes, at least for winemaking. Was it planted to Pinot Noir and Chardonnay right away and some Syrah? No, not necessarily. There were experimental with Riesling and Cab, and that whole Santa Maria Valley had a bunch of different things going on. But obviously everything got fine-tuned and evolved. And so that's where Ken Byron Brown decided that's where he was going to plant his flag originally. And then obviously now he has some beautiful Santa Rita Hills wines that he makes as well. So it's kind of all comes full circle, which is cool. So when Ken started it, Byron always been rooted in single vineyard experience. And so that's really what winery is about. So single vineyard from Santa Maria Valley and then also Santa Rita Hills, both Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. So making wines again from like our namesake Nielsen Vineyard as well as our Bienvenido. And then obviously in Santa Rita Hills, we make Tata as well. And then John Sebastiano. And I think is what is going to be fun again about trying these two different Pinots is just how close they are, but also how different they are, which Santa Rita Hills and the small, 8 to 10 mile stretch that it is offers so much variety of Pinot Noir styles, both from the distance of growing, which again, obviously Mike and Matt will talk about, but also just in winemaking choices of where you harvest what clone. And that's what we were chatting about a little bit earlier. Jonathan Nagy, who made these wines, like Clone 777 is what he chose off of the John Sebastiano vineyard, which will be really fun to explore because again, it's like that more robust clone. And I actually started, this is near and dear to my heart, Byron, is because I actually started with Jackson Family Wines in 2009 out of Cal Poly, managing their little tasting room in Los Olivos, which has now grew Clifton, so it's had a few different skins. But so I basically started my career with Byron, and then here we are tasting it virtually in this new world we live in.
And Katy, you're from Santa Barbara County originally, or?
Yeah, born and raised Santa Barbara. Went to Dos Pueblos and went to Cal Poly SLO, and then live in Santa Maria. So just ended up right in between, and started off as a math major. Went to microbiology because it's like I want to be in CSI, and then did not like OChem, and decided that I was a people person. So went into ag business, and now here I am, just slinging wine. And
was wine a big part of your upbringing at all? Or
not at all.
Really?
Coors Light, super close.
But you must have seen wine starting to come up as a culture around you when you were growing up a little bit, around Santa Barbara.
Yeah, no, completely. And as probably the similar evolution, Matt, that you've seen in Santa Barbara, as definitely saw it when going out to dinner, right? Anytime you go out to a meal, it was everywhere and wine was on every table. And my grandparents were super into wine. They're from Reno. And so they were original members at Heights Cellars and went to San Francisco every other weekend to eat in fine dining restaurants. So luckily I got that exposure from that side, luckily or unluckily, just depending on your bank account. But definitely got the exposure of the wine love from my grandmother on that side. And then again, Cal Poly is, it's a triple threat, if you will, that it has the wine and viticulture that also does the business side. So they not only do wine and vit, but they also do the business of wine. So I was very fortunate that I ended up there and then got really just into the industry that way.
And have you been with Jackson Family the whole time, or did you bump around a little bit?
I have bumped around a little bit. So I worked for Gallo for a little bit, doing 3-tier sales in grocery stores at 3 a.m. So great work ethic, learning there. And then I actually helped the Murphy family open Pressfield Winery and worked with them for a few years, opening their winery and their DTC business. And that was amazing and just an awesome experience. And we're still Wine Club members and love them. But I always found my way back to Jackson Family Wines.
Great.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about this wine. So is this a current release? Is it 17 the current release, or is this we went back a little bit in the library, or?
Great question. So we actually just released the 18, so this is a tiny bit back. So Byron, again, super small production. This wine we only made 100 cases of. So for Byron, we're mainly direct-to-consumer focused. So you could visit our website at byronwines.com and join our mailing list or our allocation list, and that's how you get access to the wines. We do have some wines, again, available in restaurants, and we're so excited for them to be open again in most capacities. And then you can find some older vintages again on like K&L walk sites, that kind of thing. But so the 17, again, just thought that it was showing really pretty right now. We're already pre-sold at 16. So, and again, 18 is just getting released. It's kind of our sweet spot. But this has been about 14 months in 100% new French oak. So while it does have a lot of oak on it, I think it's also interesting because I think it's well integrated, especially when you get some of that like Santa Rita Hills salinity on it. So again, we talk Santa Rita Hills in comparison to like Santa Maria Valley, for example. For Santa Rita Hills, we tend to get some of that sea salt. We tend to get some of those savory spices, that nice red fruit. But Matt, where do you think of it? Either Matt, that too.
I like it. I liked it when it came out. I like it still, and I agree. There is like there's an intensity to Santa Rita Hills fruit that I think can handle that kind of oak treatment. Whereas Santa Maria is a little bit more of a plusher kind of herbal style often, but it really depends on the winemaking and from both places I think too. So I don't know, Matt, what do you dig in the wine?
I love it. You know, it has that really beautiful dark fruit John Sebastiano character. You know, we're in a warmer part of the Santa Rita Hills. Also, you know, as far as the Pinot Noirs that we make at Siduri, it's probably the most easily extractable. So berry size, get a juice ratio was awesome. And this vineyard has a lot of those really tiny kind of seedless berries that Pinot Noir winemakers absolutely love. And, you know, really nice focus and really nice intensity too. And it can handle some oak, you know, it's got a lot of backbone, and that vineyard provides that in spades.
Right. Mike, why don't you tell us a little bit about, tell us a little bit about yourself, and then tell us a little bit about John Sebastiano Vineyard. I mean, it's a pretty dramatic vineyard. I know you've seen Mountain Fruit, you know, working in Napa and probably Sonoma too, but this is a pretty crazy layout, I think. So.
No. In Napa, it was all pancake flat Tokalon. The only reason you go to the hills is because you run out of the flats. That's the truth. You know. So I grew up in the Bay Area. My granduncle was a wine historian. In my background, behind me, you see some of that stuff. The California Wine Association. It goes the wrong way. The California Wine Association and that like iconic crushing thing from the Harpers. I knew as a high school kid that I wanted to be a grape grower. I never had any aspirations to make wine. I wanted to grow grapes. I ended up making wine, but that's another story that we're not going to get into tonight. But the plants and all that stuff were beautiful to me, and the tromping around in vineyards and derelict wineries with him. So his name's Ernest Pennenew, and there are multiple publications that he has. And I just this was what I wanted to do as a life, and I went to Davis as an undergrad, thinking to do get a bachelor's degree and then leave. But as an undergrad, I was so in. I worked for for a professor, Mark Matthews, who ended up being one of my best buddies. And I just loved the exploration, and so I never left. And so it's really wonderful now to take all those years of learning and turning them into what I wanted to do in the very first place. And John has given me great opportunities to do that, and I'm really excited about what we're doing in those vineyards.
And so when you were at Davis, would you farm the campus vineyard, or were you just kind of like always working on research projects?
Yeah, that actually wasn't until to the latter part of my career. Most of the time, I was writing proposals and doing research and writing papers and doing presentations and all that sort of things, and interacting otherwise. And for a while, I was the interim farm advisor in Amador County, and for a while, I was for a year. I was a farmer advisor in Napa County after Ed Weber passed away, before Monica was there. Yeah, so I
So
went
you were
to
always
graduate
itching,
school. I stayed there. I did a very academic career. It slowly has transitioned actually into what my initial idea was to go and take care of vineyards. I do think of myself as a viticulturist still. I'm not a vineyard manager. It's taken me some while to understand what those two different roles are, but I don't write checks and I don't worry about HR. So that's what the difference is.
Nice. And so when John Wagner lured you down here to work at Peak Ranch, which was then kind of a brand new property, but JSV, as everyone calls John Sebastiano Vineyard, had been planted and was going along. Were you pretty impressed just with the general topography of the area and how things look?
I was scared, man. I was scared.
It's a tough place to grow grapes.
There are elevation changes on that vineyard that, like, you hardly can't believe. We have vineyards that face the sun from all angles of the compass. We have ones that are directly in the wind, and we have ones that are sheltered from the wind. To call John Sebastiano Vineyard is a long shot. I contemplated this question earlier, and I think there's at least 7 places I could say this is distinct from the other. My
And how did John Wagner find you and lure you down? He'd taken a class, right?
Yeah. So one of my university roles was they asked me to create a class for the university has the extension has a certification thing for winemaking, and they wanted to have a viticulture component to that. And so I created and taught the class. And John was one of my first students. And I don't know how many of you know John, but John is like the nicest guy, everybody's friend, and it invites you every place. Anybody he knows, he invites you to his house. And he invited me to his house, got me a plane ticket to come and visit him. And this is before I retired. So I retired, and then he said, "Look at this stuff and tell me what you think." And I said, "Well, so anyway, that's what the evolution was. And I did retire, and he said, I think I need you down here. And I said, I think that sounds like a cool thing to do. So it's been cool. I can't tell you how just like wonderful it is. Yeah. John, and so it's just a cool place. I mean, we went through some things where he said, well, I started out really just taking care of Peak. And then they said, well, I need you to talk John Sebastiano because of how good of it, what Peak has turned into. And I'd been involved in Peak, but not directly making the decisions. And the first year in November of last year, when we finally took over the place, I said, oh my God, I was so scared. But right now, I'm really, really happy. It's an extraordinary place. You can't help but go there and just get inspired about what you're doing. And the place itself is physically beautiful. The raptors that are just like all over the place, flying through the canyons. We are getting the same kind of crew that we have here at Peak. I say here at Peak because that's where I'm sitting. Where we have full-time employees and we guarantee them a job for 12 months out of the year. We are working to have something that, there's a legal idea of what an estate is, but we are making what I think an estate is, which is a complete organization that takes care of vineyards.
Great. And what are some of the specs on JSV? Like, what's the overall acreage? And I assume it's mostly Pinot, but you've got Grenache, Syrah. Is there still Gruner out there too?
Yeah, we have 150 acres there. It was all planted in one shot in 2008. I'm glad I wasn't here for that. I mean, I would have done it, but it sounds scary as hell. Do you remember what 2008 was? And John Wagner is planting 150 acres. You know, yeah. So it's primarily Pinot Noir. There's Chardonnay and probably an increasing amount of Chardonnay. There's a little patch of Gruner and some Syrah. And I think that, doggone it, I haven't seen something that didn't do well there so far. You know, I mean, we're within the idea of what can be there. We're not trying to grow Cabernet there, but you know, I think within the things we're doing there, all the things have done well. The money part of it is right. Yeah, I can't sell Gruner for what I can sell Pinot Noir for, but you know, we're having a good time and making a lot of people happy, which makes me happy every day.
And you guys sell, I mean, that vineyard must sell to how many different producers? I went to with you actually one time, went to one of the producer parties, like post-harvest parties, and
right.
There's dozens of people there. I mean, how many do you sell to?
We sold about 30 people.
Wow, great. Cool. And so Matt, you're one of those people. You buy JSV. You mentioned a little bit about it before, but you know, when you're looking at the Santa Rita Hills as a whole, and how that compares to the stuff you're buying from San Lucia Highlands, from the Sonoma Coast, from Oregon, where does it fit in your portfolio?
Man, it is. You know, it's a Pinot Noir lover's dream to get to make wine from all these different appellations. And I think the Santa Rita Hills, you know, for me, winemaking wise, scratches an itch that I didn't know I had. I just think there's a power with an elegance due to the long growing season, you know, the East-West Valley that we all know about, you know, constant breezes, beaten down canopy, beaten down cluster size, that yields wines that are just absolutely gorgeous and have really awesome purity and textures. And I think you get like a full spectrum of fruit. You can get red fruit, blue fruit, black fruit, kind of within the same vineyard. You know, Mike, you were talking about how there's kind of like 6 distinct areas within John Sebastiano. And I think that's absolutely true. And I think that depending on where you are in the vineyard, you can have wildly different wines, you know, coming out of different sections from different producers. And, you know, one of my first trips to John Sebastiano was with my predecessor, good friend Adam Lee. And, you know, we had kind of a big night at the hitching post the night before and went out to go check vineyards. And our sections are extremely hilly. These beautiful, dramatic, sexy, you know, views from our Pomard section. And, you know, the soils are so loose and friable there that you take one step up and slide halfway back. So, you know, it's a tremendous workout. And it's a tough place to grow grapes. And it is a very tough place to establish vineyards. But man, oh man, you yield some really extraordinary flavors. And I think the wines coming out of John Sebastiano and also Santa Rita Hills in general are just absolutely delicious.
Yeah.
Matt, tell us. It is a tough place, Matt. You know, and the wind thing you're talking about. Boy, oh boy, boy, boy. I'm glad you see that as an attribute because I just see it as the devil. I mean, it just beats us up. And
the flavors are extraordinary.
People would ask me, like, you know, what is the thing about Santa Rita Hills? And I haven't gone past this yet, but it's the wind. The wind. It's always here every day. There are places on top of those hills. Matt, you've been on top of that hill at JSV where you just want to get back in your car. It doesn't matter how good the view is. It's just windy and in some of those things where those blocks are laid out or blocks in general are laid out without necessarily a lot of respect to these nuances. So some of those blocks have on top of a hill very windy components and toward the bottom very different components. And I think so. I'm diverging, but one of the things that I want to do moving forward, and the things that I've done in new vineyards that I planted for John, was try to be really respectful for the different nuances of climate and lay out the blocks so they can be cultivated differently in respect to the environment that they're presented with. So it's an expensive thing, but in the end of the day, I think that it's an investment that's made in year one that should last to year 25, and then it has to be that if you separate the wind affected blocks from non-wind affected blocks as individuals, the two wines will be better than the sum.
Yeah,
at least it gives you the opportunity to blend it later.
Yeah, and for me at least, it's nice having those really beautiful, rugged, windswept blocks that are really intense and powerful. But if there's no crop, during late season ripening, you can go from 20 bricks to 25, 26 in a heartbeat. So it's a way of kind of balancing those with vines that do have have a little more crop and are a little more protected from that intense wind. So, you have fun.
We have a conversation about the loss of water versus whatever ripening is, right?
Exactly.
Not just water out of the right?
Oh yeah.
Well, and
everything out.
One of the things that was interesting is I went to go again, like get the wines ready. I was like, oh, I'm just gonna look in my wines that I have personally. And I have a lot of John Sebastiano. So, and that's obviously wasn't necessarily in purpose for this tasting, but I have Jessica's from Story of Soil, and I have a variety of them. And so I think, again, it speaks to the site. Like Matt was saying, even though it is so different and it can express itself so differently, there's still an essence within that site that obviously is quality, but that people gravitate towards, not only just winemakers, but also consumers, which I think, again, is one stamp of quality, but two, presents an opportunity when we can all get together. We were just talking about how the last time we were all together was World of Pinot Noir, but ideally, again, like the Santa Rita Hills event hopefully happens sooner than later, but in person. And I think John Sebastiano Vineyard would be a really cool seminar to do a side by side and compare those rugged versus wind protected sites that people source from.
Yeah, I think at John Sebastiano we can find all the aspects of. We can find every part of Santa Rita Hills in one place. We can all have a barbecue in one place that we can find the hot and the warm spots. So,
well, yeah. And the vineyard came online at a time. It came online with the intent of selling to a lot of producers, right? So it wasn't a historic vineyard that slowly picked up producers. It came out with this idea of selling to all these producers, and that made a great name for the site. And also enabled a lot of these, different wineries to make different styles of this wine and really explore the vineyard in ways that you don't always see in vineyards. And that was, I think, really exciting and remains really exciting. Whenever I open wines to taste and there's a JSV in there, I'm always like, all right, let's check it out. How's it going? So, Matt, was your role coming on with Siduri? Was that your first time to be working with Santa Rita Hills fruit? And also tell us a little bit about your background as well.
Yeah, it was. So 2019 was my first foray, and I'm so glad I'm finally there. It's tough, trying to get exposure to all these different things. But luckily, there's a really, really brave guy who kind of forged the path ahead of me, and my good friend Adam Lee, who, I was very fortunate to be brought along by him into this. But a little about me. Adam and I are kind of kindred spirits. He's from Texas. I'm originally from Kentucky, where I got my first foray into wine growing, during my summers going to college. So on a vineyard in Lexington, Kentucky, of all places. So wow. I just happened to have a friend that knew how to drive tractors. It was like, hey, I can get you a job out of this vineyard. He lets us drink beer in the afternoon as long as we stuff done. And when you're 19, 20, that's a pretty cool thing. So,
what grapes were they growing out there?
This and that, some hybrids. I think there was 1 acre of Pinot Noir in the entire state, and I can't say that I loved it. But it was a good intro into, okay, here's how you manually drive posts. Here's how you set up trellis wire. Here's how you plant vines. If we're really lucky, we got to go bottle or something really luxurious and glamorous like that. But kept going to college. I was studying philosophy. graduated in '08. Mike, you mentioned '08 was just an awesome year for all kinds of reasons. At the time I graduated, nobody was getting paid to write about like metaphysics and deep ecology and stuff like that. So I was like, well, I'll just move to California and try to make wine and just be happy. So I got a job offer at a place called Williams-Sonoma the day before graduation. Finally had some semblance of a plan, at least through harvest. Just kind of daisy chained jobs together, and made wine for the next 10 or so years. And heard Adam Lee was looking around for somebody to take the reins from him. And I was like, I've heard Adam Lee's a pretty fun guy, and I certainly respect the hell out of him, all the wines he's been making, but it'd be cool to talk to him, just to see if we click. So one thing led to another. We ended up getting along pretty famously, and here I still am. So, and Adam Lee is, still my good friend. We're going to go taste a bunch of Pinot Noir right after this. So
great. Well, tell him I say hi. Yeah. Or that we all say hi. So you were at Williams-Sonoma for 10 years?
No, I was there for 3 months. I found my way after harvest onto a project that Paul Hobbs was consulting on. Stayed there for a little while. Worked at Costa Brown. Worked at a few other places. Eventually went back to school and got a degree that I'm actually using right now. I got my master's in viticulture and enology, not from Davis, but from Fresno State. Then found my way onto a project called Sojourn Cellars, making Pinot and Chardonnay. I'm sorry, Mike.
I want to interject. This is a sidebar. Matt, tell me to shut up if I shouldn't, because it's just a waste of the amount of minutes that you have.
I love it, Mike. Keep going.
Katie earlier said that she had, what was it, viticulture, enology, and business.
Mm-hmm.
When back in the ancient days of my life, there was no such thing as viticulture and enology degree.
I'm glad they came up with
it. And let's just we shouldn't spend a lot of time on this, but what it takes to learn about plant physiology and learn about fermentation science don't have very much overlap, except for Katie, your OChem. But
yeah,
right.
What's interesting, actually,
anyway,
what I was going to say, what interestingly connects this is that Ken Brown was one of the first students at Fresno State, I believe, who founded Byron Winery, by the way, to take both enology and vit at the same time. And he said he walked from building to building, and they'd look at him like, "What are you doing? Why are you going between both buildings?" That was a long time ago.
And we're still on the sidebar thing, but if you're going to get a bachelor's degree in something, you only have so many units, right? So my point is, you can't learn 5 different subjects in that amount of units.
That's why
you can be exposed to. But anyway,
yeah.
And then there's that part about
I argue this with Davis also, who'd now has a viticulture enology degree, because you can't learn enough to know about either one of those things.
That's why I learned so much about viticulture, because if you learn the viticulture and you get the grape growing right, especially with Pinot Noir, you can do almost nothing in the cellar and be rewarded for it. I like being rewarded for doing less. I don't know about you guys, but it's an amazing feeling.
I'm chastised for doing a good job.
Or like the hardest job, I think, is what I heard.
Fix my problems, Matt.
Mike, we never get any problems off of JSV, man. What are you talking about?
I know it's not true, because we all have problems about everything, or we have desires, shall we say? But I think that I'll say this is what I want to say someplace or another. At JSV and the vineyards that I'm in, we are farming with science, not dogma. And the things that I hope you see, you like, I know I'll make mistakes. And I know that next year I will hope that I don't make those same ones. and I'm honest about the mistakes that I make, and I will learn to the day that you all, please, you're all invited to my whatever this party.
All right, Matt, let's talk about some Siduri wine here, and let's move vineyards and go to La Encantada Vineyard.
Yes.
So tell us about this wine. And
yeah, so La Encantada, planted by Richard Sanford, kind of the godfather of the Santa Rita Hills back in 2000. Stone's throw west of the original Sanford and Benedict vineyard. So now we're kind of on the southwest portion of the Santa Rita Hills. So this vineyard is really, really interesting to me because it has a lot of diatomaceous earth deposits. And that stuff is really interesting. It is really rare to find a great growing area with significant deposits of diatomaceous earth. That is a good soil because it's really good with water retention. It kind of sucks it up like a sponge. In a lot of growing areas, that's kind of a bad thing. But when it rains, 7 to 10 inches a year, that can be quite good. So it's very, very windy, and we're on a north-facing slope now in the western end of the Appalachians. So about 8 miles from the ocean, it is a cold, cold vineyard. So this vineyard, I think, is a striking contrast to JSV because it's a little bit less about power and a little bit more about restraint and kind of perfumed aromatics. Still some really nice earthiness, kind of, dried herbs, crushed rock in this wine that I think are really, really cool. And again, the spacing in this vineyard is quite interesting as well because we're on 10 feet spacing. You can drive your truck through these rows to do your sampling if you really wanted to. So we didn't, I think Richard Sanford, the thought was you don't want the vines to compete against each other in an area where you're already going to have a hell of a time establishing a vineyard. So wide spacing, really, really low yields, usually about 1.5 tons an acre. And this wine is predominantly 777 with a splash of 667 to round it out.
And are you?
Can I?
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Is Matt K. Is it okay if I say something?
Yeah, please.
That spacing that you described is I love it. The vineyards at JSV and at Peak that I inherited at 6 foot spacing are just nasty. I mean, I can't. No, we've done a good job with them. It wouldn't have been my choice. And I have been fortunate enough to now be associated with Almarosa's vineyard, which Richard also planted, and also has wide spacing. And it's allowed us to change the trellising, to open up with some crossbars, to try to open up the whole thing rather than have very narrow VSP things. We know a whole lot of stuff about light on fruit and how it affects it. And the wide spacing really gives you an advantage to play with that stuff.
Plus, if Matt and Adam have weight of a dinner before picking, they just drive the truck, put their hands out, and their samples are done. No walking up hills.
And how many Santa Rita Hills wines do you guys make, Matt?
So we're currently making 4. We do La Encantada, we do John Sebastiano. We are doing Hapgood Vineyard, which is one of Greg Brewer's projects, and also Machado, which is kind of a stone's throw away. Another vineyard that we're not making a vineyard designate yet, but is definitely worth mentioning, is a vineyard called Paraloon, which is off of Highway 246, about a mile west of Hapgood Vineyard, so kind of in the heart of that kind of corridor right there. But it's a new vineyard coming on, planted in like 17, 18, 19, kind of in phases, that I think is going to be absolutely dynamite. We got our first crop off of it last year, and it's really, really good. So look for that one, maybe 2021, 2022, depending on, the way the vines cooperate.
And do you have any sense of how you're going to take Siduri onward? I mean, I know Adam through the years went sometimes riper, sometimes less ripe over the years. I mean, there was, as anyone would owning a winery for that long, you change in styles. But what are you thinking?
Kind of, my ultimate hope is that the people that drink Siduri wines that aren't like super nerdy about who the winemaker is, I hope they never notice that there was a change in the winemaker. That's my goal. It's like if we do a vertical of like 18, 19, 20, it's like, oh, well, these are all good, if they like our wine to begin with. That's the idea. Each vineyard kind of has a different balance point. There's vineyards in the Russian River that will pick, 23 bricks because it doesn't like being picked right. There's stuff in Santa Lucia that will pick pretty ripe while we're waiting for the acids to kind of calm down to where the wine will make it through a melt. So it's about being kind of tuned in and just being present in the vineyard and knowing what, not being too forceful and kind of squeeze everything into a stylistic box that it doesn't want to go into, more or less.
Right. And let
me say that all of y'all's presence in the vineyard is extremely appreciated. It is like, I want to give you what you want, and that if it's like almost ripe and you say, well, like, where the heck were? So thank you both for being in the vineyards and paying attention to my fruit. The people, the winemakers who give me the most, I wouldn't say irritation, but the most like, hey, what's going on, are my favorites. Because I think it's together. I don't want to tell you how to make wine, but I want us to both get together about how we make what the kind of fruit you want.
I was going to ask that, Matt. I mean, you must work with 20 different growers across California and Oregon, maybe more?
More or less. I mean, luckily, some of them farm multiple properties for us, like, for instance, the Pisoni and Francione families in Santa Lucia. But it's just about establishing a dialogue and being present and just, and showing up, I don't want to be the winemaker that shows up in August being like, why didn't you drop more fruit? Why didn't you pull more leaves or stuff like that? Plus, I don't want to sit on my ass at the winery, all through spring. I want to get out there and get my boots dirty. So, it's about establishing relationships. And it's way more fun to partner with people that have the same common goals and the same kind of stylistic aims that you do. And, Adam forged a lot of those relationships, and it's really awesome to, maintain and continue those.
Great. Katy, what do you think of Siduri wine?
It's making me hungry, number one. But I think it really evolved from when I first poured it into when we actually got to taste it, which was really cool. Like, it was kind of like, I don't want to say tightly wound, but it was, I was like, oh, this is yummy. But then it just like got 10 different flavors to it. And again, to me, it's almost like a little bit of like a dry rub that you would get on some barbecue. And that's probably just, again, the Santa Maria in me. But you have these like layers of like beautiful brown spices, but there's also just like the saltiness to it. And it's, again, just like deep and layered, and I want to keep on pouring more. And I also want to try it with food.
Pour some more.
Yeah, pour some more, I will. But I also think it's fun, like, again, like going back to the Byron, and also kind of changes how I perceive the Byron. So going kind of back and forth between the two as they've opened up. And one other thing, again, obviously I spent a little bit more time on the marketing side than the rest of you guys, but so looking at them, the other two things that I love about these wines is, like, obviously Siduri's been committed to screw cap throughout its entirety. And for Byron, we use Dion cork. And so for both of those, like, you can open them with confidence, right? Like, you're not going to have any sort of taint issue. And that just more and more as the world of wine, one, grows, but also two, like, obviously through COVID, retail has been more and more popular. So you don't have table size service. You don't have any like is this supposed to taste this way? You know, you're just kind of blindly buying wine and hopefully that's right. I think that's also nice opening both these wines, knowing that I didn't have to like pre-open them, taste them, and check them. They're just ready to go. But yeah, the Siduri's evolved beautifully over just the 30 minutes we've been on here.
Right. Yeah. There's a lot more. The herbs are sticking out.
Here on the closures.
Yes, I don't want to ruin all the work you did.
Cork. Yes. I mean, something that we actually know what passes through it in both the screw caps and the composite corks that you talked about, like versus, I mean, like, you know, yes, here. I'm 100% behind this whole thing as a consumer.
Right.
Aside what I know about the chemistry, but as a consumer, I mean, you can put different liners in the screw cap for different oxygen ingress. There's no way in the heck you have any idea how much oxygen is coming through a natural cork. The numbers are like crazy.
Well, it's that, and again, like Mike, like, you know, you've dedicated your career, obviously.
That's what I did, yes.
Science of growing grapes, but you also came out of retirement. I mean, the leisure you could have with not dealing with John Sebastiano every season. But you came out of it again for like your love and passion, and to spend for all the winemakers, like again, like Matt or Greg, who you mentioned, like all the people that spend all of their days in the vineyards throughout the growing season, to do all that work and then to have 6 to 7% of it go to possible like TCA or whatever the current rate or standard is. And again, obviously it's nothing against natural cork, but people evolve, science evolves. There is at a certain point, kind of an opportunity to evolve with that and not have all your work.
But Katy, you also had this statement earlier about how you are more involved in the marketing side than the rest of us are, or maybe not Matt. Matt sells something, but heavy bottles, cork. What do people expect when they get the wine? And can you sell a wine that says, "Hey, listen, this is actually better, but it's not what you're used to"?
Yeah, I think people quickly evolve. We actually just yesterday for International Women's Day, like one of our sister wineries, Cambria Winery, had a fascinating panel, and part of it was, Samantha talking about sustainability in practice and how part of that, again, is looking at your glass, and that lighter glass equals, again, lighter shipping equals less fuel use, and it all matters. Less material use, less material being made. And so I think as people that are buying wine, and as people in general are spending their money for consumer products, that they are voting with their dollars, and they are looking into labels, and they are looking into choices, and they are looking into, it's not necessarily, I don't think as taboo, again, like screw cap isn't just like an identity, right? It's like, okay, what's in that bottle of wine? How is it made? What's the varietal? Who makes it? It's not just like, oh, that has a screw cap, I'm gonna toss it to the side. So luckily, I think a lot of those barriers have been broken. I think there's still like obviously romanticism, and there's other ways, but there's also a lot of flair that have been done with different closures of how you open them, how you present them, how you educate the consumer about them. So I think we're really fortunate that we're in the time that there isn't necessarily rules to wine, which is great.
I know I've just fallen in love with the sound of the screw cap coming off.
Oh yeah.
There's a way of romanticizing the cork being pulled. That's always going to be great. But the screw cap sound is my new favorite.
Yeah, no.
Can you do the roll off?
Exactly. That's what I was going to say.
There are oftentimes I go to the grocery store that I won't buy it unless it has a screw cap. I won't buy it unless it has a screw cap.
And I think also, again, in this era of, of COVID, right? Getting outside is a big thing. And luckily in Santa Barbara County, we obviously have the ocean, and that's just been part of our lives. So you go to the beach, you take wine, you take beer, whatever. And I mean, if I'm going to go to the beach, I'm going to honestly look for my screw cap bottles, and that's what I'm taking, because that's easy to open, fresh to enjoy. Like, it's just a mindset too. So again, I think you can have serious wine screw caps and people are over it and learning about that. But I also think there's an accessibility that makes it an easy choice, and why not?
So I think there are two things. There's an environmental part of it with the bottles and all that kind of stuff. And there's actually honestly, God, there's a wine quality thing about it, right? Mm-hmm. If you know how much oxygen is crossing that neck into the wine, you have an advantage over an unknown. It has to be.
And then I have all wines that are, 50 years old and old world and gorgeous. So there's nothing. I think it's just
but no, it doesn't mean that you can't be more consistent.
Correct.
I mean, the cork people are saying that they're, next year there's not going to be any more cork TCA problems. I mean, they may have been saying that for years, but I just saw another. TCA
is a problem, but not the problem. Oxygen ingress is the problem.
Yeah.
It's not a consistent amount of oxygen that crosses the cork into the wine. And so even in lack of TCA, you can have markedly different wines in the same box because of the amount of oxygen that went into the wine over the 15 years. If we're talking about 3 or 4 years, it really doesn't make that much difference. But if we engage this idea that a wine of age is of value, then there ought to be some consistent idea of what that wine is after you put it in the bottle.
Yeah.
And
you can't find a better example of wines to test than Siduri's older vintages. I mean, they've been doing it for a long time. So.
Yeah, I mean, we moved to screw cap after years and years and years of trials. So it's not like a decision we made lightly or Adam made lightly. This was years of research and tasting. Adam went to screw cap because the wines tasted better after several years of aging. So that's it. That's all the proof I need.
Yeah. Great. Well, we can always work on our rolling off the screw cap and.
When it's not sweater season, I think it'll all better traction.
That's right.
We got off on a tangent, man, and I apologize, but it's just like it's one of the soapboxes. We're gonna do stuff. We got to do stuff, not because that's necessarily the way it always done, but we need to be able to learn. And I've said many times that I respect everything that came before me. It is my obligation to move it forward, and to say that that's the way it has been, and then you can't improve on it. Well, my career would be nothing, so I can't do that.
Yeah, no, Mike, I totally agree.
It's all of our obligation to make a better product every single generation that comes along.
Mm-hmm.
Here, Mike.
Cheers to that.
Salud.
I totally agree. And that's the way we've always done it, is one of my least favorite answers. So I totally agree.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I appreciate the support. Yeah. I learned from people who spent time doing this stuff, right? And to me to park it in the parking lot and not move it forward with something that I can learn, right? Do you want to stop some medical knowledge at whatever year it was and say that's as good as we can do? It's not. There'll be response to this. It's not art, it's science. We're making a perishable product. We're trying to learn about how to make it the best way we can. There are people who are better at it or have insight. Let's say, not better at it, but have insight as a human into what goes on. But at the end of the day, the molecules combine with each other in a way that we would like to know more about.
Yeah. Great. Well, I think ending on science is a good way to do that. You know. So I think we've covered quite a bit about Pinot, quite a bit about the Santa Rita Hills, quite a bit about closures, quite a bit about John Sebastiano Vineyard, Long Cantata Vineyard, Siduri, Byron, Mike Anderson. Thank you guys for being here. Coming up in the weeks to come, we have a Foley tasting on next week, March 16th. Then we have Rio Vista Vineyard on March 30th. With the owners of Rio Vista Vineyard are now making some wine. And Norm Yost from Flying Goat is also joining us, and maybe another producer. And then April 6th, we have Matt Dees and Ruben Solorzano are joining us from the Hilt and Rancho Salsiquete. So that should be a fun tasting as well. So thank you all for joining us virtually. I look forward to hanging out again and you know, in person and cheersing for reals. But this has been a fun and I think hopefully informative session, and these delicious wines, and look forward to trying some more sometime soon. So thank you all.
Cheers.
Man, Katie, thank you. They're beautiful. They're beautiful, and salute.
Salute.
Great to see you guys.
Say hi to Adam, Matt.
I will.